Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast, where we teach clients how to build wealth and create passive income without the risk of Wall Street.
All right, guys, we just wrapped up our interview with Blake Johnson, estate planning attorney with Trusted Estate Planning. And, man, a bunch of really good information once again.
Yeah, I know we talked a lot about asset protection, and ways to protect it with LLCs, with trusts, and with life insurance. And we talked a lot about estate planning as well. And what I would like to say, because I didn't make this point during the interview, is that how important it is to have an estate plan. Now, whether that is a living trust or just a will, I think it's important for a few reasons. For one, particularly in regards to if you have children, that can help guide who you'd like to be the guardian. But also, it will state out your last wishes, which I think is very important. And I know a lot of times people don't want to talk about it, and I understand it. What I'm seeing now, since I'm getting to the age where some of my friends are having to have these issues with their parents, but to be honest, I'm having friends that are having these issues themselves. And what I've seen is a burden it puts on the children when the wishes are unknown. For example, I have a good friend of ours who they didn't know what the mom's last wishes were, and all the kids were trying to figure it out, which created stress on top of an already stressful situation. And the mother had passed away. It's probably been about 8 years now, but my friend still has concerns on whether she did what mom had wanted her to do. And if mom would have just had even a will or a trust, that would have allowed the children to focus more on the mourning and not second guessing on what mom or dad would have wanted. What sort of things stood out for you, Cam?
Yeah, before I get into my takeaways, I want to apologize because during this interview, you'll probably see me downing this energy drink.
Yeah.
Non-stop. So I just got done running the marathon, and I was a little tired.
Well done, man. Well done. We first one, right?
First one, yep. 26.2.
Yeah, and it was, you ran it at night, right? So it was a pretty cool one, right? Oh, I'm imagining because I didn't do it.
Yeah, Las Vegas Rock and Roll Marathon. So we started at 4:30. Sun went down about 5. So we had about 3.5 hours out there running under the Las Vegas lights.
So at 4:30, you're running 26.2 or 3 miles, right?
0.2.
I was watching Ford versus Ferrari, right, which was a good movie. And then we went to BJ's afterwards, and we were just talking about our plan, what's going on this week. And I'm like, we're doing this podcast. And I go, I don't know how Cameron's going to do it. He is like, right now he's trying to run a marathon, and we're trying to determine, are we getting a Pizookie or no Pizookie? We ended up not getting the Pizookie, not because of you, but honestly, it was because my father-in-law was with us, and he's like, man, there's 1,000 calories in the Pizookie. I'm like, Dad, I would have gotten one.
Yeah,
but
just talked about it.
Now that you pointed out, I'm going to pass, and I'm glad I did.
I was drinking that thing, kind of dozing off over here, so I wanted to apologize. But, man, Blake, bunch of good information again, like I mentioned, but there's really two kind of takeaways. One was what I liked is he kind of touched on kind of estate planning through the ages, right? We've got clients up and down kind of the spectrum of life, right? Young families, professionals, and then we also got kind of business owners that are looking to exit the business and sell or sail off into sunset. So we kind of touched on those topics. I really enjoyed that. And then also my favorite was really kind of a personal bias is how he got into banking and practicing banking himself.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to hear his journey or his story on how, like when he first heard about the infinite banking concept, on how he thought about it. And he even had some advice for somebody who is maybe on the fence on whether they should do that. Yeah, that was very good.
Yeah, I thought it was great. To be honest with you, we got Blake is a very educated professional that has seen the pros of banking. So it was good to have him on.
Awesome. Enjoy the episode.
Take care. Welcome to the Influent Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Fasto. Anthony, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Looking forward to our podcast today as we dive a little deeper into asset protection and estate planning.
Absolutely. Today we've got managing partner of Trusted Estate Planning Attorneys, Blake Johnson, here with us. Welcome, Blake.
Hey, thanks, Cameron. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Let's dive right into this. Can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah, I'm an estate planning attorney. I grew up between Las Vegas and St. George, and it's been a family business. I worked with my dad before, or when I came out of law school, and he's still practicing. But now that I'm a partner and the one who runs the show down here in Vegas, we've rebranded to Trusted Estate Planning Attorneys. It used to be called Law Offices of Kurt Johnson. Kurt's still involved. He's just taking a back seat because he's earned it. He's grown the practice and done all those things. So we're growing. We have an office in Salt Lake now. We have an office in St. George, and we're focused solely in estate planning.
Awesome. Love it. Let's one of the first questions I've got for you is this is kind of a misconception that I get a lot of times is estate planning only for wealthy people?
I hear that all the time. People say, "Hey, I've got a will. I'm good. I don't need a trust." That's only if you're, extremely wealthy, the Donald Trumps of the world. And that's really all that we need is a will. And that's really not the case. The main reason people do estate planning or do trusts first is to avoid probate court. And that's the biggest expense that most people have when they pass away is that probate court. And so, the trust is a way to avoid that. If you have minor children, you also would want to use a trust because, let's be honest, if you give money to 18-year-olds, they're not going to make good choices. And that's the default law for every state in the country. So those are a couple of ideas of why you would still want to do estate planning and get a trust prior to having, tons of wealth. Obviously, if you have that, there's more complicated stuff. There's multiple trusts we're going to use to worry about estate taxes. And I think that's where people think, trust comes in is when we have estate tax issues, but that's not necessarily the case or the main reason.
So with the estate plan, so you're kind of talking more like a living will.
So
I'm sorry, a living trust.
Correct. A living trust. Yeah. A living will's different. That's dealing with healthcare decisions.
Correct. Well, what I found, I'm a big fan of somebody having a living trust, not just to avoid probate, which I think is enough reason, but also you mentioned minor children. And I think you were referring in part to them taking on the assets of their parents.
Correct.
But won't a trust also help determine guardianship?
So the trust cannot determine guardianship. That has to be done through a will, and guardianship can only be appointed through a court. So that's unfortunate. There's no way around that. So we can avoid the probate court process from a standpoint of the assets, but to appoint a guardian of minor children, that has to be done through the court. So you have a will. With all of our clients, even if we're doing a trust, we are going to do a will. And part of the reason for that is to appoint a guardian for those minor children. And then that lets the judge know, okay, we can help expedite this guardianship procedure, but a court has to declare a guardian if it's not your parents.
Oh, okay. So the will may say, look, I want my sister or this cousin to be the guardian, but it still needs to be approved by the court.
That's correct. Yeah. The idea being public policy, we want a court to step in, make sure it's somebody who's actually going to be good, because a lot of times people do these wills and then they die 20 years later, or let's say 15 years later, 10 years later, and the person that they appointed isn't necessarily the person that's the best suited for that, and they haven't updated that. So it gives other family members a chance to come in and say, hey, look, this person's not a good fiduciary, this person's child abuser, whatever the case may be. They have an opportunity to prove that to the court, and that way we make sure the kids are actually taken care of from that perspective. The financial side, we can avoid that, and hopefully you choose somebody who you can trust there. And same thing on the guardian for minors, but it's that second fail safe there.
So then what happens if the parents do not have it in the will on who they want to be the guardian? Then what happens?
Then the court, whoever wants to, files the initial case with the court, and then They have to notice all the family members. So any heirs, parents, siblings, cousins, pretty much everybody that they can think of. And they all have an opportunity to come before the judge and say, hey, I want to be the guardian because of this. I don't think this person's qualified for these reasons, whether it's they live far away, they have these issues in their past, whatever the case is. And then the judge decides at that point. So it's better to say who you want, because that's the first person the judge is going to go, and you have to prove that person is not fit.
Okay.
Otherwise, they will be selected by the judge.
So the bottom line is, if you don't pick who the guardian is, the government's going to do it for you.
Correct.
And that may not be the same person.
That is correct.
Right? So, and you are right. You're getting technical about the will and the trust. I'm kind of thinking a lot of times it's like a package where you do the trust and a will. So I think if you have minor children, you may not want the guardian may not be the person, whoever the government decides may not be the person that you want, because they're probably going to be more focused on the bloodline, I would assume.
Yeah, it's bloodline. They go closest family member first. They also look at closest to home initially, if there hasn't been somebody named. So they want to keep them local, not upset their life, is the theory behind it. But if you have someone named, that's who they're going to go with. And a lot of the times the discussions I have with my clients are based on the fact of, who has the same ideology you have? How about for child rearing? Do they look at discipline the same way you do? Do they look at teaching them fundamentals about finance the same way you do? I think those things are more important than necessarily keeping them close by. And, that is often overlooked. My wife and I, for example, we've changed ours a few times based on different experience and interactions we've had with the people that we've chosen. And so, those are the things that play into that more of, is lifestyle. Are they active? Do they do sports like you do? Do they go to the same church? Do they, have the same fundamentals that, that you do?
Right.
You got a follow up?
Yeah, I do. Because I'm just a big fan of getting the estate planning. And you mentioned, like, a lot of times it's perceived to be for the rich, but if you have children, I think it's very important. And even if you don't, as part of typically the will, I guess, would be the medical directives.
Yeah,
would you maybe kind of share like what that is and what that isn't?
Sure. So medical directives, those are, you have a healthcare power of attorney, and then you have the living will. Living will is also referred to as a directive to physicians sometimes. And so, they're two different documents. They essentially do the same thing. It's, your DNR, do not resuscitate, is usually in there. Who do you want to make healthcare decisions if you're unable to make them for yourself? And what are your wishes? Do you want to be on a feeding tube? Do you ever want to, if you're in a coma, do you want them to just keep you alive and keep hoping? I've had a client who's in my office and said, hey, yeah, I was in a coma for 9 years. So those things you have to weigh in on when you make those decisions, and that is the document to do that. And I will say, so I have two kind of standards for people to decide whether they're ready for estate planning or not. The first one is if they have minor children and they have any sort of life insurance payout, and because that's going to determine whether there's assets there for the kids as soon as they turn 18. Do we want to protect that and prolong that so that it's used correctly? And then the other one is if you own a home, because if you own real estate, no matter what the equity is, so let's say you have $5,000 of equity, you have to go through probate court to get to that property to the correct person. Whereas, Nevada has a limit of $25,000 for liquid assets that says if it's under $25,000, you don't have to go through probate. You can do what's called an affidavit of entitlement, and then that bypasses the probate court. But if it's real property, even if you only have $5,000 of equity, you still have to go through that probate process. So owning a home, and if you have minor children, those are the two main starting points of whether we need to do an estate plan or not.
I even have a good friend of mine whose brother had passed away, and the brother didn't have children. He had a house and a car, and he had a little condo. They were able to go to, I think, like expedited. It's probably
a set aside.
Well, it was, he didn't have to go through like a full probate, but it was like an expedited one because the assets were under a certain level. But even still, their probate cost to go through that, even through an expedited manner, was, I believe, about $2,000.
Mm-hmm. So that would be a set aside. So if it's under 100,000 in equity, or everything total is under 100,000, it's a set aside. And yeah, 2,000, that's the minimum I've heard of anybody doing it for.
Yeah. And, just going through this difficult time with my friend, not only is he trying to live without his brother, right? Now the house technically isn't his. He had to wait through probate and before he could really do anything. And it just added just a layer of burden that really didn't need to be there.
Well, and they have a constant reminder of saying, hey, from the attorney's perspective, I call them, with updates on where things are at. Hey, remember how your brother died? Here's where we are with that process. Where you contrast that with a trust, it's all right, sign the affidavit. Whoever you leave in charge has access to everything. Go mourn. Deal with the finances when you want to, but it's there and you have access to all of it. You don't have to have that constant reminder and deal with an attorney and have this ongoing problem.
Great point. Good information there. As I was going to kind of make this a broader question, is because what you're talking about there was kind of young families with children, right? Is my practice is really broken up between three pieces: is kind of real estate investors, kind of business owners 50 to 65, and then kind of young professionals with families. Is you've already kind of touched on that younger family and some of the planning that may come along with that. Can you maybe add on to those other two and say, hey, if you're a real estate investor, maybe consider this. If you're a business owner, maybe consider this. I know it's a really big topic, but maybe just the highlights there.
Yeah. So when you have the younger generations of estate planning, you have people who want flexibility. They're planning for their minor kids. And so they want to be able to have changes done. And so we're not necessarily going to lock anything in permanent, typically on a younger client. And as the client ages, then we start looking and stuff. The nice thing is it's called a living trust because you live, right? There's things that go on. It's changing. It's evolving as your situation changes. And so that's part of it. As business owners continue to grow and they get to the point where they're going to transition that, do they want to transition it through the trust when they pass away? Do they want to transition it early? And we can use trust to help with the income tax planning side of things, as well as the estate tax planning aspects of it. We're going to look at maybe even, transitioning some of it now, some of it later. And a lot of that is, capital gains versus when you inherit it, you don't have that. And then you're also going to have making sure that we have asset protection in place for not only the client themselves, but for the kids going forward, because anything that you receive inheritance through a trust, that can be protected for those kids ongoing. They're not going to be touched by creditors, by divorce, by bankruptcy, or any of those issues. So it can be a great way to do that. And then from a real estate standpoint, same thing, asset protection, for you now, there's different kinds of trusts that we can deal with. And I think they kind of all have the same things of, are we worried about flexibility or the transition or taxes? Those are kind of the three main issues we look at in different stages of life, have to have those different priorities.
One thing you had touched on is with the children or the next generation, if you just simply, even if you just have life insurance and you give them the death benefit, that money now becomes unprotected. And I know that and I'm sure you're going to do a better job explaining it than me, but like what we have for our family is the money, instead of it going directly to the kids, it actually goes to a trust, right? So then they technically don't own it.
Correct.
And that you want to expand on that?
Yeah. So we call this a sub-trust idea. Basically, you can divide, upon the death, we divide the trust into separate shares for each child of the trustors, the person who set up the trust, so of the parents. And the money all flows through the trust. And so this is another topic we can talk about as far as beneficiaries of life insurance. I think that's a relevant one. So one of the reasons you would want to name the trust as that beneficiary instead of the individual is so that it goes into the trust and then it becomes protected. Because we say, all right, we divided this trust out amongst the 4 kids. And when they each reach age 30 or 40 or whatever age you decide, they can take over as trustee of their share. So they have access to the money, full access to the money. They could take it out the next day and spend it all. But by leaving it in the trust and using it in the trust name, so if they want to buy a house, they buy it in the trust name. Mm-hmm. Those assets never can be touched by creditors, never can be touched by a bankruptcy court, never can be touched through divorce, because the money is technically never the child's. It's still owned by the trust. And so that's how it gives it that protection.
So when you say a divorce, let's say when Vicky and I pass, we're going to leave a financial legacy to both kids, and that if they get a divorce, how is that protected?
Because it's still in the trust, it's never the kids. And so when they file for the divorce court to split the assets, she doesn't have to list those at all, or him, or whatever the case is, because they're never theirs. And so there's no way for them to say, "Nope, I get half of that." Now, anything that is inherited in general is not subject to divorce. The problem is if you commingle it. So if somebody gets a life insurance policy proceed, typically what they're going to do is they're going to go deposit that in their joint banking account, checking account. And that's when it becomes part of the marital estate. And that's when it becomes subject to it. By having it pay out directly to the trust, it never has that issue.
Okay, awesome.
One of the things you mentioned was asset protection in there. Is we are living in Nevada, right? You practice in Nevada. Can you kind of tell us how Nevada ranks amongst other states in creditor protection?
Number one.
Asset protection, sorry.
Number one. There's a few out there that are close, or may say that they're number one, and it depends on different issues. One of the Dakotas, I think it's South Dakota, maybe, is another one that's really good. Alaska's pretty good. Utah's fairly okay. But those are the main ones that have the ultimate asset protection. But Nevada's always been at the forefront. We're the ones who are the pioneers as far as trust law goes, and asset protection, to make sure that we have those protections in place. One of the biggest things that we have is the Nevada Asset Protection Trust. And the idea of that is it's a separate trust you set up. You can put, some of your assets in there. And if you don't get sued for 2 years, those assets are untouchable in future lawsuits. Now, you have to have a Nevada resident as a co-trustee, but you don't have to be a Nevada resident to take advantage of it. So we have clients all over the country come here to take advantage of it, and they just get a local trustee to be a co-trustee with them. And we can get around some of those aspects of it by having an LLC be owned by that trust, and then they're the manager of the LLC, so they really get around having to have that co-trustee with them. But that's, advanced stuff. But the idea is it's really helpful. And we have a case from the Nevada Supreme Court that said that asset protection trust is protected even against credit or spousal support, which no other states have that case. Usually there's a public policy saying, hey, spousal support or even child support, we want to break those asset protection trusts because we want them to be taken care of. But Nevada courts have ruled, nope, if you set it up the 2 years prior, those assets aren't untouchable for spousal support and child support.
Well, that sounds pretty good to me. So when would an asset protection trust be? When should somebody start considering an asset protection trust?
I mean, each case, the favorite attorney answer, it depends, right? have to throw that in there at least once.
Of course.
For me, I look at what their liquid asset situation is. That's the biggest thing at risk, because if you have retirement accounts, those are protected by ERISA. If you have rental properties, put those in an LLC. That's a much better protection with more flexibility than the asset protection trust. Because Nevada, once again, being one of the best for asset protection, they have what's called the charging order protection. So let's say if you were you had a rental property in California and you caused a car accident and got sued. If it's in an LLC and you're the only member of that LLC in California, the courts there say, no, we're going to go into that LLC, force you to sell that real estate to pay off the debt. Compare that to Nevada. If you're a single member LLC, they cannot go and break that LLC and go and get your assets and force you to sell. They can only get if you take money out of the LLC. So that's a huge protection there. And so that's why LLCs are probably a more effective way to do that for rental real estate or any other real property there. And then your own personal residence, you have the homestead exemption. So outside of that, okay, those things are all protected. Life insurance proceeds are protected in Nevada. So where do we see the most risk? It's those liquid assets. And so we want to look at, all right, do we have 100,000, 200,000 of liquid assets? That's what it's at risk. And that's when it starts making sense to do that asset protection trust, because that's the only thing that we really need to protect at this point. We can put other things in the trust, but this is when we really think it makes sense to do that asset protection trust, because that's the most at risk and there's no other way to protect it.
Now you just mentioned putting properties inside of an LLC, right? When you work with real estate investors talking to the state of Nevada, a series LLC always comes up in the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So LLCs in general are still the new thing as far as corporate entities go, and they're the favorite because they have the flexibility as far as choosing what your tax status is. Do you want to have it flow through? Do you want to be taxed as a partnership? Do you want to file as a corporation? And then you also have the flexibility as not being a corporation as far as the rigidity there, and you have more control instead of having officers and the reporting and all those things. So that's number one. Well, people wanted to take that a step further because from a liability standpoint, if you have a rental property and it gets sued because of something that happened on the property, they can come after anything that's in that LLC or that the owner has. So if that's why you want an LLC to own that property, not you individually, because if you get sued or if something happens on your property and it's your name, you get sued, your house is now subject to it. Any of your liquid assets can be subject to it. So first layer of protection is that LLC. Well, what if you have multiple? Well, they could come after any houses that are owned by that LLC. And so the series LLC came about to say, all right, we don't want to have to pay for separate LLCs for my 15 different rental properties. That gets costly. Here in Nevada, that's $350 a year times each LLC that you have. Not to mention if you're filing tax returns for each of those, which, personally, I think you should be to avoid the audits and be more aggressive with your taxes or with your deductions on your taxes. That cost just goes up. So the series LLC says, all right, we're going to take the best of both worlds. We're going to say, all right, you can put house one in series one, house two in series two, and they're protected as if they're in separate LLCs from a liability standpoint. But you only have one filing with the state of Nevada, and you only have one tax return that you have to file because there's only one tax ID associated with that LLC. And so you have the protection as if they're separate LLCs, but you only have the one fee that you have to pay. And there's no limit on the number of series you can have. I've got one client that I can think of that has 26 series. So think of all the money that saves her and having that same protection as if they were all separate entities.
Any downside of having a series LLC?
The biggest downside is not every state has series LLCs. So if you have properties in different states, it's going to depend what those state rules are as far as whether you can put that property into a series. There's a few states out there. I think there's 14 that allow series LLCs. Delaware, Texas, Utah, Nevada, Alabama, Ohio, I think. And then there's a few more who don't necessarily allow you to form series LLC in that state, but they'll allow series LLCs to be recorded in their state. So that's just a case-by-case basis where we need to go through and see if it makes sense to do that. I would still say, you probably want a separate LLC for the different states you have anyways, just because you're going to have to file a state business license there. So you might as well form a separate entity. Just from especially if that state has its own income tax, you're going to have issues there. So that they don't try to say, oh, we're going to get the whole LLC's income tax, even though there was only the one property there. So those are different issues we look at. But if all your properties are here in Nevada, series LLC is a great thing. The other downside is a lot of the national banks don't know how to set up the series LLC accounts and don't want to learn. And so you're going to have to work with the local bank. So if you only have a relationship with a Wells Fargo or a Chase, chances are they're not going to set up a series LLC bank account for you. And so you're going to have to change your relationship there, which, nowadays it's so easy. I don't think that's a big turnoff, but there's a few people that do. So I know Nevada State Bank does series LLC, City National does. Those are the two main ones I've worked with, and they're really good at it.
Let's say somebody lives in Nevada, but they own a rental property, say Tennessee.
Okay.
Should they get an LLC in Nevada, or should they get the LLC in the state that the property is at? Or does it depend?
It depends, but I'd say most likely it makes sense to have the LLC there. Now, if they're going to own property here as well, I would say get the LLC set up here, and then you could segregate it and say, we're just going to have that one series. I believe Tennessee has series LLC as well, and you could separate it that way. But once again, if they have state income tax, you probably want a separate LLC for that state.
Makes sense.
So you can say, hey, this is the most that we can pay income tax on is just this one property for that state.
Okay. Now, I love the idea of somebody has a rental property to ideally put that into an LLC because, like you said, it's going to protect. If something happens to that property, it's going to protect your personal assets. We have a lot of clients that are buying these properties with say a mortgage, say an FHA or some sort of mortgage on the property. can they buy like if I'm getting it financed in my personal name and the loan's my personal name, can I move that into an LLC?
Yes, I do it all the time. So there is a clause in the mortgage that people get really scared of.
Yeah.
That says that, due upon sale clause that says if you transfer title, then the loan amount is due in full. And with the LLC, if you're the sole member, moving into that LLC is not going to negate that. And the other thing is, unless you notify the lender, they're also never going to know, and that's never going to be an issue. And they don't look at recordings unless you go to refinance. And usually, all they do is they say, "Hey, take it back into your name so we can refinance." And so we do the deed to refinance, and then we'll move it back into the LLC at that point if we need to. But I've never had an issue with the lender saying, "Oh yeah, it's in an LLC now." They understand that it's better protection. It's better for them too, because then if there's a lawsuit, it can help, make sure that there's still assets owned by the individual. That they could go after that the other creditors couldn't if they win that lawsuit.
So speaking of credit protection, we've talked to a couple things, credit protection, then also some of the trusts that help with that. One of the big products that we use cash value life insurance, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the credit protection that cash value carries in the state of Nevada?
Once again, it's number one. No creditors can go after cash value of a life insurance policy in Nevada. So that's a really great thing to have. Some states, they have it as low, I think I saw as $4,000 is the maximum amount of cash value you can keep, and they can come after anything else. So another great reason to live in Nevada, establish your residency here, is because of that. The other interesting thing is Nevada automatically has creditor protection for any beneficiaries that receive payouts from a life insurance policy, which I thought was really interesting because once it goes to the individual name, you would think the creditors could do it. So I don't know how that plays out from a timeline perspective. So let's say you got $100,000 from a life insurance proceeds. 5 years later, you have a creditor. Can they get those proceeds? Most likely. But I think what the idea is, if you're in the middle of a lawsuit, or you've just had a lawsuit finish and then you get a life insurance distribution because your dad died or whatever, I think that's where they're talking about it being protected.
Great. So what you said, you have states like Nevada where it's 100% protected, and then there's some states where it's very minimal protected. What I found is that every state has some sort of level of asset protection. Some are great like Nevada, and some aren't. What we're going to put in the show notes is a link where you could see how it relates to the state that you are in.
Yeah, that'll be helpful because, it really depends on which state you are. Unfortunately, because we live in the U.S., each state has its own laws dealing with everything. And so you have to know your state-specific laws. And that's why each attorney has to take a bar in every state that they practice, because every state has those different rules and laws that you have to know.
Well, there's been a tremendous amount of insight here. And you and I have known each other for several years. Can you tell us a little bit? I want to bring up your internship or your when you worked with Northwestern Mutual in college. It's a big word, but if you could tell us about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so that was my first exposure to life insurance when I was in college. Because I knew eventually I'd go into practice law of estate planning, and because I worked, my dad had done that my whole life, and I knew I was going to go join him eventually. I decided to take it so I could learn the industry specifics, learn about life insurance, learn about wealth management and how that's going to work with the estate planning side of things. And so I did their internship program and then stayed on for a few months after that. And it was really insightful, very great education as far as the insights into how policies are built and those kind of things. And that kind of what started me on down the path of looking for, whole life cash value building policies.
What year was that approximately? What was it after year 2000?
Yeah, that would have been 2009, I think.
Well, I was just curious because Nelson wrote his book "Becoming Your Own Banker" in 2000.
Okay.
And so it took a while to catch on, but I was wondering, was there any mention or exposure to IBC?
Not in the sense of the name or Nelson Nash's name, but it was, hey, here's an option, use the whole life, borrow against it, was definitely taught.
Okay, cool.
I don't know if I want to say this, but how is that background kind of played into you using this as a strategy personally?
It definitely was very helpful because I was exposed to it and saw, hey, look, here's a different option. Especially, I didn't like the idea of traditional retirement plans because I'm a control freak. I like to have control and access to everything so I can use it how I want. And so this was the way of, okay, yeah, I can put stuff aside. It still continues to grow, but I can pull that if I need it. So ideally, yeah, I'm building long term, but I have the access to it if I need it to, and I can continue to contribute to it as well as use the funds while I'm using it.
Awesome. What would you tell somebody if they're sitting on the fence on whether to kind of use this strategy or not?
There's a lot I'd tell them. I would say first and foremost, you don't have to commit and go all in with all of your money right now and commit to a huge monthly premium on it. I would start with a small policy. I think everybody should have some term life insurance and some whole life insurance. Once you've established the basis, you've paid off your debts, and you have your emergency savings done. So start small and buy the rest in term that it can be converted to that if you like the idea and you realize you're disciplined enough to do it. So one, you have to know yourself. Are you a disciplined person? Can you commit to making these monthly payments and not back out in the first, especially 7 years? Because that's when it's just building the cash value, and all of your fees are going to be eaten up in the life insurance part of it, because there does have to be some paid for the life insurance policy to get the tax benefits of it. So that would be the first and foremost thing. And then look at, educate yourself, meet with guys like these two who really understand it and know what's going on, and get the perspective, and then, see what the options are there. And then, slowly over time you convert it and you realize, this is something for me. So I'm going to do it.
Would you mind sharing, sorry to put you on the spot, but would you mind sharing some ways that you have used your policy?
So I'm still just building the cash value. I haven't had to use it yet. My idea of what I'm going to use it for is I want to use it for real estate. Mm-hmm. I've got policies on my kids to pay for their college if they choose to go to college. But I mean, if they don't, that's one of the benefits of it. They don't have to use it for education. Whereas that 529 plan, they have to use it or they pay the penalty. And then, I wanted to use it for buying cars or whatever the case is. I really like the flexibility is I can use the money for however I want.
Awesome, Blake. Can you tell if our listeners have any questions where they can find you?
Sure. Trusted EPA, that's as in trustedestateplanningattorneys.com. And then my office number is 702-616-6001. And Tamara's my assistant. She'll be able to, get you on the calendar if you have any questions.
So if somebody did, it's like, hey, I don't know if I need an estate plan, is there a free consultation? Is there something you could kind of guide them through before a commitment? Or?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we always do free consultations. You get a free 30 minutes. We'll go through your exact situation, see what assets you have, see what you want to accomplish, see if that's even doable. And then once I know that, I'll quote you a flat fee. I'm not by the hour. I want to, have up front exactly what's going to be cost you. And then we build the plan from there. If you say, yep, that works for me, I can do that. We do a deposit, and then the rest is due when it's done. And we have a 2-week turnaround process. Another resource they can go to, I have a book called You Can't Take It With You. It's the top 15 estate planning questions answered in plain English. We can get a link for you guys to put up on from the Amazon to get that. So that can be, a better intro for you there. And, those are all the resources we've got.
And you got a podcast, right?
I do have a podcast. It's called The Trusted Podcast. You can follow us on Apple or on Spotify.
So we will put a link in the show notes to all of those. So I know you're obviously licensed in Nevada and Utah because that's where you have offices, but is there anywhere else? Can you only help people who live there, or?
So I'm also licensed in Arizona. I took the bar in Utah, and Utah and Arizona have what's called the uniform bar exam. So I could transfer my score there. So that was how I got that. Thankfully, I didn't have to take 3 bars. Yeah. I wasn't that much of a masochist. But no, like I said, we have clients all over the country who want to take advantage of Nevada's laws. And so what we do, I can't practice laws in their state, but I can practice Nevada laws. So if they're willing to come or meet with me, and we can do it, digitally or whatever, but have Nevada law be the governing law of what they're doing, sure, we can help anybody throughout the country.
Okay. And one question I like to ask some of the guests when I remember is there a book that you've read either now or recently? Like, there's always these top 5 books, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? But is there maybe a book that maybe not everybody's heard about, but that really impacted you? Or maybe there's one you're reading now.
The one I'm currently reading, well, I do Audible, I'm listening to, is Tax-Free Wealth. It's by Tom Wheelwright. He's one of the Rich Dad advisors. That one's really good. I think one of the best ones I've had is The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan. I can't remember his last name, but it's basically a modern take on stoicism and how, you shouldn't really be mad that you have these obstacles in your way or your challenges. These are what form you to the person that you need to be and what help you actually accomplish these great things. And I really enjoyed that one.
I thought you were going to say faked.
Faked
or a fake by the new book.
Oh yeah, Fake by Robert Kiyosaki. Yeah, that one's really good too. But I was trying to think a little bit outside the box. He's pretty well known, so something that's not as well known.
No, it's good. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for coming out here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next episode. Also, check out our website, infinitewealthconsultants.com, to find our podcast along with other additional resources.